Hey, I just went 1 minute and 22 seconds with not on the screen. All right, we can do this. I wish I could start over, but hey, that's why we have repentance. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this live stream with Kurt Francom with Leading Saints. I'm going to talk about why you need a podcast. And I know you didn't even know you needed a podcast, but you do. And I'm glad you are here with us. So those that are tuning in live, if you wouldn't mind just putting in the comments, maybe where you're listening in from, maybe what your church calling is, maybe share with us if you are intrigued by this idea of a word podcast, or if you've already started a word podcast. I'd love to hear from you. And as I go through here, as different ideas, especially those who are experienced, any ideas come to mind, then please put it in the comments, and I'll be monitoring those. So that really helps me test my tech as well to make sure that we're connected. People are listening, because I'm already off to a bad start here. But somebody gave me a heart. That's nice. Hey, Jessica from Gilbert, Arizona. Thank you for joining us. I'm just pulling up my email because I got some sweet emails from people who've actually started Word podcasts. Sean's here, man. We go way back. We hang out way too much, Sean, but I like it. I hope you don't mind. Sean from Tennessee, Kathy from Edmonton, Alberta, seminary teacher, but love this idea for our stake also. I don't know. I think that would be a phenomenal idea as well. Wendy's here from Mesa, Arizona. Thank you for joining us. And they're rolling in. This is maybe an intriguing idea. This is a more well-attended live than usual. We got a lot of Canadians here. We'll take you. Where I'm trying to click on we got Russell from Kamloops, BC. I feel like Canadian cities just have a different flavor to them as far as the name, right? Kamloops, British Columbia. Very good. Peter says, I am the ward engagement specialist in Pittsburgh, North Carolina, and we're getting ready to start one this month. Peter's going to do awesome at that. Judy's here from Utah, a neighbor here. Love the idea. Is it Callie Kemple? I'm probably saying that wrong. From On the Road, RV family, primary pianist currently, but want to create. I mean, if you're road tripping, you need a YouTube channel, right? That's what the cool kids are doing these days. San Bernardino, Lehigh, Utah. My good friend Ryan Almond is in the house. John, thinking about a youth run stake podcast. Ooh, let me know how that goes, where they share family history stories as a lead up to Trek. Yeah, that's a great idea. One that I want to include here is it doesn't have to be like this project that we're going to do forever, right? Maybe it's just, hey, we're going to do the next 6 months. We're going to have a family history focus in the ward with the youth for Youth Trek, whatever it is, and create some stories, put them together, and then you can just be done with it. So love that. Fishers, Indiana. We have a podcast, not super consistent yet, but I'm loving it. Consistency is not important. I mean, it helps. I'm kind of in a lull with my word podcast right now, ever since I was called as the Elders Quorum president. I need to find someone else in the word to help me, but all the things I got to do. So this is an excellent idea for stakes and for coordinating council levels too. Absolutely. We've even people, I'll read those emails here in a minute, but people have interviewed like non-members in their area, right? There's no rules with this, right? Unless your bishop finds out and says, hey, I have a few rules for the word podcast. I kid. All right. So very cool. As you go through this, I'd love to hear ideas. I'll do my best to monitor some of the comments, make sure I answer them. But basically, this is what happened. Well, first of all, I want to say this is December 28th, 2024, at the end of the year, and I would not run a good nonprofit if I didn't invite you to participate in some form of donation. If you get any benefit, even from this live stream, would you mind going to leadingsaints.org and click on that big, beautiful donate button and give a few bucks, give a few $1,000, give a few $1,000,000. I mean, we'll take it all if you have it to give, and it really does go to a phenomenal organization, Leading Saints. We're impacting church culture in such a positive way around the world. I mean, just people flooding in here to learn about something as simple as a ward podcast. But let me tell you what, you get a ward podcast going in your ward, it will shift culture. So if you wouldn't mind to open an additional tab and take time to donate, that would really be beneficial. So got to give a shout out to my man, Sean Edwards. Greetings. Good to see you, my friend. I had a tough time getting momentum behind this idea. So looking forward to your thoughts. Yeah, sometimes, the leader's ready, but the ward is not. Right? So you pick your battles. It's part of leadership. But hey, maybe you can send this link to somebody who is who's wanting to do a ward podcast, and or somebody in the ward, and just like get the motivation, get the ideas flowing for them. Okay. So I actually recorded this episode, the first version of this episode, back in December of 2021. So, I mean, the good 3 years ago that I originally posted this, and I actually listened to it this week. And throughout the whole interview, or it wasn't an interview, it was a monologue episode, I'm just telling myself, now, Kurt, that's a terrible idea. Don't tell him to do that. Right. Oh, my camera's okay. Almost lost my camera, but we're good. And so I wanted to give kind of a refresh on this idea, some resources, some ideas, some ways to approach it, and hopefully it will help you because there's new resources, there's new technologies, and along my journey of doing this in 3 different wards, I've learned a few things, and I've realized, wow, that I overcomplicated it before. I can see how that could get somebody discouraged on this path. So I want to record a new episode like this and delete the old one so that there is so we continue momentum building towards this. So why a ward podcast? The big thing as I see it, and this, don't let me go off into a tangent because I will if I'm not disciplined here, but a ward, one of the purposes of a ward, in my opinion, is to stimulate community. And all positive culture is based on a foundation of community. My friend Dan Duckworth, who's board member at Leading Saints, talks about culture is the memory of 1,000 moments, right? And that's the elusive thing about culture. It's hard you can't just create policy and influence culture, or create rules and influence culture, or just, speak words and influence culture. It's so much deeper than that. And it's got to be based on a foundation of community, because if you're like me and have had human experiences, you know that when you get to know somebody, you're intrigued by them. You're endeared towards them, right? You understand them. You're more empathetic. You're more patient with individuals whom you know. And a word podcast does this. Now, what we typically do in our experience is we do the sacrament meeting introduction period, right? Maybe a new couple moves into the ward, a new family. You ask the mother and father to speak, and typically the sister stands up and says, "Let me take a few minutes to introduce my family to you." Now that makes sense. In the years past, that was sort of the only forum, the only megaphone you had to project out your story, to share who you are, where you're from, what you do for a living, where you served your mission, right? But one, that's not the purpose of sacrament meeting, right? Is to get to know each other. And 2, it just takes precious time. And 3, sometimes it go off the rails, right? We've all been in that sacrament meeting. So I would just even as you get a podcast going, just having an appropriate forum to really get to know one another. Another thing I was going to add there is that a few minutes is not enough to understand very complex people with very complex faith journeys and careers and personalities. And so you create a forum in which to do that. And now with modern day technology, it's so easy to do that. So the reason why you want to do a word podcast is to stimulate positive culture, right? And I could say that maybe for any piece of content that Leading Saints creates, is that's what we're striving to do. That is what leadership is culture influence, right? Hopefully for the better. Another reason you want to do this is, it's a good ward history. And man, I would love to go back to my childhood ward and listen to interviews of people that I saw that I grew up with, right? That would be so intriguing to have that history, not only for ward members, but for family members as well, is awesome. And then, yeah, so those are maybe some main reasons to consider a podcast. And again, don't put a lot of pressure on ourselves. We as Latter-day Saints have a tendency to make a thing like, oh, we're doing this now and it's every week. And, there's a pressure to stay on top of it. Sometimes it's hard to get somebody to sit behind a microphone and talk about their story. So just remove all pressure and say, let's get as many stories recorded as possible, right? That's what I'm doing in my ward right now. Before I was called as Elders Quorum president, that was one of my focuses, is doing the ward podcast. And I did it pretty much, I regularly hit and miss here. And now it's kind of in a break, but I'll get behind it again and get some people involved, and that's okay, right? We'll get to those stories, but it's awesome to know that the stories I did record are just out there and people can learn about, Christoph and Sam and all these other individuals in our ward, about their story. And then as they listen to them, it's so fun to hear these hear these conversations in the hallway of, oh, I listened to your episode. That's so cool. Tell me about this and this and the other, right? And it really stimulates conversation and makes it easier to talk with one another. So, all right. A few testimonials I wanted to share. This is from Brian Murray. He said, I started a ward podcast a few years ago. Let me try something first. If I, just so you can, maybe this is a bad idea, but we're going to test it anyways. I'm going to put it in the comments here, and it's thinking. Oh boy. It's like breaking it up. We'll try it. He said, oh, there's a lag. Here we go. I started a ward podcast a few years ago, listening to Kurt talk about it on his podcast. We interview ward members of the ward and encourage them to tell their life story with emphasis on their spiritual development. I'd actually been released as a bishop of the ward, and one thing I noted while serving is that even though we are in the same ward for years, we actually do not know each other very well. I felt that the first step in building a Zion society is to come to know each other in more, I think it's split it up, in more of some kind. For those who have participated, they are always extremely grateful for the opportunity and have used it as a basis to start their own life story for posterity. Many members have come, this is kind of a fun game for me only. Okay, that's not working. Let me go back to just my, let's see, Zion, we released, I felt that the first step in building Zion society is to come to know each other in more meaningful ways. I used to talk by Sister Beck on building Zion as my guideline. We released about one episode per month, and they tend to be long, 60 to 90 minutes each. The one problem we have encountered is that some people do not want to participate. They do not want to be known, I presume out of fear of some kind. But those who have participated, they are always extremely grateful for the opportunity and have used it as a basis to start their own life story for posterity. Many members have commented that after listening to a story that they now can understand other members better. One member died suddenly and unexpectedly about 1 year after their episode. That member's family was so grateful to have the recording archived. Isn't that awesome? So, and I do that every time when I record. I usually send the person, I send them the raw file of the MP3 and say, here it is, do what you want with it. And I think you can actually upload it to Family Search, and put it there, and away it goes. So for the posterity. All right. Hopefully I didn't. J2B says this is also a great way to involve missionaries and at a stake and area level get involved with government officials, interfaith councils, business owners, etc. Absolutely. This could be something your communications rep can do with getting to know the community, interviewing local businesses, local pastors, and creating a forum where you can get to know one another. So very, Very dynamic ways we can use this. Let's see. I wanted to share my good friend Ken. I've been doing award podcasts on and off for a couple years. Here's what I've learned. Everyone thinks they are boring, including the guy who speaks Arabic and the woman who does forensic genealogy. It is so true. I've even noticed that with leading saints, that everybody thinks they're boring. And once you get them talking, everybody's fascinating. He says, number 2, everyone is interested and has incredible. Everyone is interesting and has incredible stories. People I've known for decades have parts of their story I've never heard before. Too many people are afraid to sit down in front of a microphone, but so far I haven't had any casualties. It's true. I've never witnessed a death during a podcast. He says, I'm not interviewing you. We're just having a conversation like we would if we were having lunch together. I'm not going to dig. So if you don't want to discuss something, don't bring it up. I'm doing the podcast for me. I love getting to know members of my ward better. That's a really like a fringe benefit is those who actually do the podcast. I know of a guy who did the ward podcast and then he was called as a bishop of that ward and he continued to do the podcast because it is such an easy way to get to know people and it's a fun way too. He says, rather than go back and forth to coordinate schedules, I have a scheduling link through Calendly that puts people in my calendar. It's mutually convenient. I've had a couple of individuals on the podcast. I've had couples and individuals on the podcast. Couples have that easy for the person who won't otherwise be on the podcast, and they always share stories. Individuals make it easy to learn more in each person in the family. I kind of suggest my approach. I mean, if somebody is really nervous and they only want to do it if their spouse is there, I understand that. Just roll with it. But I would much prefer doing individuals, and it's fun doing like one spouse followed by the other spouse because you just kind of hear their dating story and how they met, and then you get the other side of the story, and it kind of builds this fun dynamic. You kind of see who's, two versions of the same story. Ken also says, I won't pressure my wife to be on the podcast, but I do sprinkle things about her when there's an easy connection. It's totally worth it. You should do it. So really cool stuff. Brad asked about editing. I'll get to that. How much time, cost of equipment and software. Ooh, I got a great answer for you there. And here's Ken himself. I don't edit mine. I think that's much added value. So that's actually Ken who I was just reading about. See this. Hopefully I'm not freezing up on anybody, but this kind of freezes every once in a while. Jason says, we've been running a word podcast for over 2 years now, and it's still going strong. We actually interview members of an entire stake and have also interviewed members of other faiths. I think more than anything, we learned that people want connection. As a bishop, it certainly has helped me build relationships with people who not normally be on my social network. So true. All right. I know you want to get to the good stuff. So let's jump into that. So the first thing I want to say is when starting a word podcast, I can't emphasize this enough. You've got to keep it simple. Okay. And you may think, oh, what about brother so-and-so? He's got like a garage band that he does and he does some audio work, and that's fine. You can call him and have him help with the podcast. But what happens is that he brings his technical mind. He brings the all the equipment, right? And the mixers and the top of the line mics, and he's got the studio and he invites people and he overcomplicates it, which is fine for him. For him, it's not overcomplicated. He's like, I could do this in my sleep. But then he moves out or he gets a different calling and you call someone else, and there's a sort of this high standard, right? So even myself as a podcaster, I keep it really, really, really simple. I use this mic simply because this is where I happen to be, and it's a good podcast mic, but there's nothing wrong with using your laptop mic. And I know there's audio engineers out there like screaming at me, but really there's no reason to overcomplicate this. Most laptops now, most phones, most iPads, they have phenomenal microphones as compared to anything in the past. So really keep it simple. Don't let the tech guy run over. And really there's almost no cost to this. I would probably suggest you think of all the money that goes towards cold ham on Christmas or decorations for the trunk or treat, and you could probably give 50 to $100 every year to the Word Podcast, and it would probably make a considerable difference. But definitely not necessary. Okay, so let's talk about equipment and software. Equipment and software. So this is the thing. Keep it simple. Use Zoom. In my first episode, my first recording, I said, it's really good if you go to their house and you can use your phone or just get a simple recorder or whatever. But no, especially after the pandemic, everybody is pretty comfortable with Zoom, and it's very easy to record, and everybody knows how to hook their microphone up, and it's so much easier to convince people when they just have to get on a Zoom call rather than have you come over. I got to clean the house, or I got to go over to this person's house. I don't know if you feel comfortable. You want to meet at the church, or it's just, again, keep it simple, right? Just do Zoom. Say, I'll send you a Zoom link and we'll get on and we'll just have a conversation, and you just record it via Zoom and you download the audio file and go from there, right? Very simple. Just use Zoom. Now, there are free audio editing softwares out there. If you do, maybe there's an interruption or there's some tweak you want to give it, but really I rarely edit anything of the interviews I do. Now, of course, I've done almost 800-900 interviews in my professional life, so it's a little bit easier for me. I recognize that, but you can use Audacity, which is a free software that you can pretty much do anything with when it comes to audio editing. Or most Macs, as I understand it, come with GarageBand, which is a software pre-installed on the Mac that is pretty straightforward with editing audio, so you can do that. I also, let's see, did I put this here? There's also an online service called Auphonics, Auphonics. And I'll link to all these things in the show notes once I get done here. Auphonics runs the audio through it and balances it, so that way if someone has a really soft voice or their mic was quieter than the other, just balances it so that one person's not screaming at you while the other person is whispering. It's the same level, and they have a freemium model, so there's plenty of bandwidth there for you to do a Word podcast and using Auphonics. So record on Zoom. I export the MP3 file. Maybe I need to edit it, put it into Auphonics, or Audacity or GarageBand, make a few tweaks. In my opinion, some people like to get cute with the podcast and do some music and maybe a read through, like, welcome to the Wander Ward podcast, and my name is Kurt. And no, stop it. Just put it out there, right? Keep it simple. You don't want to have this editing process. Even if you can do it, the next person may not be able to do it. So keep it simple, right? So no music. I don't put any music on it. Just here it is. We just start talking and people listen to it, and nobody's ever complained or accused me of having a very low professional podcast, because it's not a professional podcast. It's a Word podcast, right? So keep it simple. So Zoom, export the MP3 file. Maybe I'll edit it through Auphonics, run it through. I'll edit it through Audacity, run it through Auphonics, and there you go. You upload it to the podcast host. Now, that takes us to hosting. Last time I recorded, you could use Anchor, which I believe still exists. Spotify in the last few years bought Anchor. Anchor was simply, I think it's anchor.fm is the web address. And Anchor was bought by Spotify in the last few years, but I think it still exists, that you can still use it as a free podcast host, right? And so you can create there, put your podcast art there. You can use Canva or take a picture of the front of your church or your bishopric or relief society presidency, whatever, and make that your podcast art. Again, keep it simple. It doesn't really matter as long as people know where to go. I think I just use Canva, use a few, clip arts and font, and you're off and running. Pick a nice color. And so with hosting, you can try Anchor, because to me, some people will want to, they're used to podcasts, and they will want to subscribe to it. Now there are ways, and I think Anchor has this ability. I also recommend Blueberry, which is a paid host, and Transistor.fm is another one I've used. I bet those are paid, right? But again, might be worth it. And usually for a really low key podcast, they have pretty affordable rates there. But again, you don't have to do that. Now, a lot of hosts, they will have an option to do a private podcast, which means if somebody's searching through Apple Podcasts, they're not going to see your word podcast pop up. Now, in my opinion, I have a lot of unpopular opinions. Privacy and it being public available doesn't really matter because nobody's searching for your word podcast. Okay. So they're probably not going to stumble over it. You're not going to get a lot of traffic because you're not reaching for a broader audience. So Apple or Spotify is not going to promote it or put it on top of some list somewhere. And even if they do, I just don't think people care. Now, some people are weird about their stories or whatever. There's other things you can do about that. This actually was a suggestion from my good friend Lindsay Clyde. She runs the Why I Stay podcast, which you should check out. She's done it where she uploads, and this is you can upload it to YouTube, okay, and just put it as unlisted, and that way only those with the link to the actual leader, a link to the actual video or interview, those who have the link, only they can access it if it's unlisted. I believe that's the case. You can create like what do you call it? A playlist, of all the episodes, and they should be able to get in that way. Or you can really keep it simple and secure and just create a Google Drive folder, a Dropbox folder, and just put it there and then give everybody the link to that folder, and then they can listen to it that way. But to me, I just really don't think you're not exposing people. It's not like you're putting it out on Facebook, right? And saying, here's my friend, listen to their interview. Like the way podcasts and RSS feeds work, nobody's really going to stumble upon it if it's in a podcast feed. And I know people appreciate it and will listen to it more if they can add it to their Apple Podcasts or their Spotify list or whatever it is. Okay. So hopefully that answers. I saw this question from Reed. Can you restrict who access the podcast to your own ward, or does it go out to all the world? Yeah. So hopefully I answered that there. Sean says, you could put a link in the unit history page of your ward. What a phenomenal transition, Sean. So a few weeks ago, somebody's out there, if you search Leading Saints ward history, you'll find a phenomenal episode I did with, I forget her name, but the church has recently created a ward history, a ward unit. I have the URL here. I can, here it is. So if you go to, I will put it in the chat here. You're logged in and you go to unithistory.churchofjesuschrist.org. I'll post it twice there. Oh, I see, to Facebook and YouTube. Gotcha. If you go to unithistory.churchofjesuschrist.org, it will take you into your unit history. And I think only ward council members have access to creating something that has to be approved, or your ward historian. So whoever does your ward podcast, you can give them access here. Now, I've talked with the project manager at the church office building who's actually doing the unit history. I don't think they have a way of attaching audio files yet to the word history, but you could put a link in there, right, from Google Drive or wherever it is, and then point people that way. And then that will create some more security that way if you so desire. So that's with hosting. I think I've covered as far as hosting, some options there. Again, just keep it simple. Let's talk about interviewing. So like it was mentioned in some of those emails, some people don't want to be interviewed, and really that's fine. Unfortunately, it's the older generation of the ward who's like really suspicious. I've had a few interesting conversations as I approach, the sweet 80-year-old lady who's probably has a phenomenal life story, and wait, you want to come to my house and talk about my life and put it on the internet? Like what, And usually I don't, there's no reason to push. But you can, maybe take the angle of this will be a wonderful family history. We can send it to your family and make sure they're aware of it. They would love that, obviously. But I would say get the low hanging fruit at the beginning. I always try when I start a ward podcast, I try and get the the bishopric, the relief society presidency, the ward council, all recorded, sort of setting that example. And of course, people, these are people that are more prominent, visually prominent in the ward, that people might be intrigued by their story or who these people are. There are leaders, but who are they? What's their story, right? And so I usually start with the ward council, and then as you get more and more interviews out there and people listen to them, people become more and more comfortable with what you're doing. And so, but there are people who don't want to do it. And oftentimes I'll say, if they're really like, I don't want to do that, say, how about this? I'll come over, or we'll connect through Zoom, make it simple. Let's do a Zoom call. We'll record it just as a test run. We'll just see how it goes. And then we can decide at that point if you want to share it with the ward. And worst case scenario, you can just keep the file and you'll have a living history, share with your posterity, right? And that usually gets them to the point of, okay, actually this isn't too bad, or that interview went better than I thought. So yeah, why don't you share it with the ward? It's fine. I've had that happen quite a bit. So I always send them the MP3 separately for their records. And again, they can attach that to upload that to Family Search. I recommend interviewing spouses separately unless they're really apprehensive. I think people seem more at ease when they're just talking about themselves and they're not like wondering, well, if I say this, my spouse will think that, or they'll interject, or no, it didn't happen that way. This is what happened, right? So, a lot of people asking, well, what questions do I ask? And again, this is a hard one for me just because I have so much experience interviewing people, but I just say, just get really curious about their life. And I try to do it through a timeline. Like, tell me about where were you born? The question I always start with is, tell me, where does your name come from? And man, I've learned so much about people when they talk about their name and their middle name and their last name and their maiden name and ancestors, or this funny story of where their parents got the name. Like, it's a phenomenal first question. And I literally hit record, tell me about your name. Or I say, what name is on your birth certificate? And that usually launches off in a conversation. And then just talking about their upbringing, what their parents did, what kind of kid they were. And then I get into their faith development, as a youth. Like, what was being like a youth for you? Were you always a believer? Was a mission a no-brainer for you? Or was it something you really questioned whether you should do, right? And really, I lean into, I think the trick is you're always looking for the friction point in their life. And this is sometimes a little uncomfortable and takes some practice, but man, I remember an interview I did a few wards back with a lady, had a young family, and one of their children passed away as an infant. And man, just to talk about that, very respectfully, but the faith development that came out of the miracles they saw through tragedy and all that was such a touching story. And so don't be afraid to maybe, whether you need to ask permission or whatever, say, hey, can I ask you about that? I would imagine that was like a real struggle for you. What was that like? Right. Because that's the point where the humanness comes out, is in those friction points. The struggle is the points where Jesus shows up. Right. So lean into that. And then just keep going, asking the general questions. Tell me about your career, or why'd you pick that career, or where'd you work? Did you like it? Right. Like all those things. And then usually I end with the question of, if you were to get into a time machine and go 100 years into the future, what one message would you tell your posterity? And man, it is so cool to hear some of those responses and to know that their posterity will literally hear that in 100 years. That is so powerful, right? Like, I wonder what my great-grandfather would say to me. Like, if he had 2 minutes with me, what's the one message he would share with me? I would love to hear that, right? So it's just such a blessing to record that. Let's see. I mentioned all this. Mission, professional life. All right, so that's the general interview. I'll look for questions as they come through if anybody has that. Again, just keep it simple. It's going to feel like uneasy, or you think, I didn't do a very good job. It doesn't matter. You did more of a job than anybody else did by just doing the podcast, right? And they'll appreciate it. I would much rather hear of the worst interview of my grandfather or my great-grandmother than no interview at all, right? So don't put too much pressure on you. All right. The next thing, as far as promoting the podcast, this is this is kind of tough because some people aren't familiar with podcasts or how it works. Other people are like, oh, what's it called? Bing, 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 boom. I'm subscribed. I'll listen to these. This looks great. Right. So, but I make a real intent to promote it. And so one thing I've done is I will get I'll just print out, I'll put a QR code. If you don't know how to make a QR code, ask a high schooler or somebody, make a QR code that links directly to the podcast feed or the Google Drive folder or the YouTube channel, whatever it is. And so people can just scan it with their phones. I usually put one that goes like in the Relief Society roll and the Sunday school rolls. And usually every week I'm like printing a new one out and just making sure I have it. I'll approach people at church like, hey, have you, here it is. Have you listened to the podcast at all? Right. And then I'll take time to just raise my hand, before a lesson and say, hey, we have a word podcast. You should really listen to it. If you have a word program, definitely goes in the word program so that people can find it there as, they're in sacrament meeting or whatever it is. But I just keep mentioning it, right? If you have another place, a word Facebook group, if you have one of those, paste the link in there. That makes it really easy. And some people listen, a lot of people won't, but that's okay. Like some people get around to it. But we had another great approach is sometimes you get those sacrament meeting talks that are like, whoa, like that was awesome. Remember one sister in my ward talked about her journey with being diagnosed as bipolar as a young mother and how that's impacted her life. But she talked for 15, 20 minutes, right? And I wanted the whole story. Wait a minute, there's so much more there. So I interviewed her the following week. And so people love that in the ward to just hear the whole story and really dig in. We talked for over an hour about her life and things. So look for those opportunities to those who speak in church that maybe there's an opportunity for them to talk. So QR code, put on Facebook group, become a ward historian. I talked about unithistory.churchofjesuschrist.org. And I think that's it. Let's go to Jess here. Love this. Plan to chat about this as a bishopric tomorrow morning. My ward has a lot of OG members with so much to share. Have you involved youth in any podcast episodes? Just thinking of them too. Yeah, I actually get this question with leading saints a lot. Like, why don't you interview more youth? And youth, I'll be honest, youth are just hard to interview. If you've ever been a bishop, you know this, right? And so you definitely can. Maybe there's a fun way to do it. Maybe interview 3 boys at a time in the ward, 3 girls at a time. Maybe they can play off each other or something. But it's just tough, right? Or maybe have a really verbose teenager, who's the drama kid who's used to being on stage and whatever. Maybe they could run with it and do a youth channel, right, for it. So try it out. A lot of these things I haven't tried, but doesn't mean they don't work. And I'd love to hear how it goes. So, but that's the gist of why your ward needs a word podcast to build community. Just keep it simple. Just use Zoom. Keep it going that way. And feel free to put your questions, your suggestions in the comments here. Here's Ken. He says, I did a group interview with several young men at a high adventure camp a couple years ago. It was great. Yeah, I love that, where you get them in an atmosphere where maybe they've been hanging out for a day or two. They're at a young men's camp. They're hanging out by the fire. It's just, there's a lot more, everybody feels relaxed and maybe they're more likely to chat that way. So love it. And again, when you're in person, keep it simple. Just use the recorder on your phone, right? And you can, as you're holding it, you can just say, yada, yada, yada. What do you think? Yada, yada, yada. What do you think? Right. And just keep it simple. Don't buy equipment. Don't get a studio. Don't ask your bishop for $1,000 to buy the perfect microphone. Not worth it. So with that, I'll hang out for a few minutes. If you have any other questions, I'd love to hear them and answer them. But I think I basically covered it. So we will make this into a podcast and put it on the podcast feed as well. This video, it's a live on YouTube. If you haven't subscribed to our YouTube channel, if you'd be sure to go do that, so that we can continue to do these lives and get more of a reach. The more people we like, or give this video a thumbs up, that always helps as well. And we'll put it on the podcast feed, and we will keep doing this. So again, if you wouldn't mind taking the time to go to leadingsaints.org and hitting the donate button, and hopefully this was value and help us continue to do this type of content by contributing to the nonprofit organization Leading Saints, and be great. So any other questions? I'll wait for 15 seconds here, and if not, we'll log off. So thanks for joining us, guys. Jessica says, thank you, Kurt. I'm excited to make this happen. Please keep me posted. I'd love to hear how it goes for people. Ken says, I haven't done it yet, but I'm thinking of passing around a list like a missionary calendar to get people who are willing to be on the podcast. Love it. Always just test it, right? Wendy says, do you just record with voice memo or another app? I've had recording apps fail me in the past. I'd like to find the apps that give me an MP3 file. So if you just search and try a few apps and just make sure it downloads an MP3 file, even if you have to pay a few bucks for it, it's well worth it. I think Google has one that's already a voice recorder on their Android devices, but yeah, find one that you can try the voice memo. You know, if it gives you an MP3, that's easy to edit and things like that. So Ryan says, I know you said use Zoom, but what camera are you using? I'm using a Canon EOS. I don't know. I have a very nice camera. Obviously, this is, I use this for top level Leading Saints contents, but you do not need this kind of camera. Any laptop camera will be just fine. John says, thanks, Kurt. I love the advice and about keeping it simple. Yeah. So true. Kathy, this was very valuable. Thank you. A great starting post for me. Awesome. Yeah, get started. Go out there and start the Word podcast, build community, share each other's stories, and I promise it will shift the feeling of the Word, the relationships of the Word, and it'll be awesome. So, all right. Thanks, guys. Oh, here's another one. Do you collect participant releases for podcasts? I don't. Maybe you should. You can talk to the attorney in your ward, but I don't even do that with my Leading Saints podcast. So maybe there's a class action lawsuit coming my way. I don't know, but I think generally in this world, I just don't see a reason for it. So no, I do not do that, nor will I. I don't think it's worth worrying about, but I don't know. Maybe an attorney will say you're crazy if you don't. So. All right, guys, we'll end it there. Have a good one.